Throughout history, people have tried to give shape to injustice. When laws fail, when violence goes unanswered, when the innocent die without witness or trial, cultures often turn to symbols, omens that suggest the world itself has noticed what humanity chose to ignore. Among the most unsettling of these symbols is a flower known only from fragmented records and whispered tradition, the rose of the reaper. It is not a rose in the botanical sense, nor is it associated with beauty or fragrance. It is a marker, a signal, a quiet accusation growing from the soil itself. According to legend, the rose of the reaper blooms only where death was wrong, where lives were taken unjustly, secretly, or without mercy. And unlike other symbols of mourning, this one could not be harvested, owned, or studied without consequence. First mentions in the margins, the earliest references to the rose appear not in official texts, but in margin scribbled notes beside prayers, trial records, and monastery ledgers. Medieval monks did not devote full passages to the flower. Instead, they warned of it in cramped handwriting, as though reluctant to draw attention. "Do not touch the pale thorn," one note reads. "Where it grows, judgment has not been given." These warnings appear beside accounts of executions later deemed unlawful, mass graves following purges, and unrecorded burials along forgotten roads. The flower was never described as a miracle or a blessing. It was an indictment. The rose did not prevent death. It remembered it. A plant without a pattern. Descriptions of the rose of the reaper are remarkably consistent across regions and centuries. It is said to have pale or ashen petals, sometimes tinged with gray or bone white. The stem is thin but covered in unusually sharp thorns. The leaves appear dry even when freshly grown, as if drained of vitality. Most disturbing is the sap. When the stem or petals are damaged, the rose bleeds not clear resin, but a thick red fluid. Witnesses described it as slow-moving, dark, and staining, leaving marks on skin that lingered far longer than plant matter should. Some claim the sap was warm. Others swore it pulsed briefly before stilling. Places where it appeared the rose was never found in meadows or forests by chance. It appeared in specific locations. Execution sites later ruled unlawful, crossroads where travelers were murdered and buried anonymously, fields where entire villages were quietly erased during political upheaval. In one documented case from the late 1500s, a rose was reported growing directly from the crack of a gallows platform dismantled decades earlier. In another, a cluster appeared on land newly plowed for farming, revealing bones beneath the soil shortly afterward. The flower did not grow where death was common. It grew where death was wrong. This distinction mattered deeply to those who feared it. Early attempts at study by the early modern period, natural philosophers began collecting plant specimens with increasing confidence. Curiosity slowly overcame superstition, and the rose of the reaper became a target of study. The results were consistent and alarming. Cuttings withered within hours. Roots removed from the soil decayed unnaturally fast, collapsing into blackened pulp. Seeds, when planted elsewhere, never sprouted. Even sketches of the flower were sometimes destroyed by the artists themselves, who claimed unease while drawing it. One physician wrote that the plant resisted possession as though it belonged only to the place it grew. Still, one specimen survived. The one that did not die in the early 19th century, a botanist skeptical, methodical, and dismissive of folklore successfully transported a living, rose specimen from an abandoned execution ground to a controlled environment. Unlike all others, this one did not immediately wither. It remained upright, its petals did not fall. Its color did not fade. When examined, the stem was nicked accidentally by a metal tool. The sap emerged slowly, thicker than expected, red, heavy. Chemical analysis at the time was limited, but notes describe iron content inconsistent with plant resin. Most unsettling was the reaction of the specimen itself. Witnesses claimed the sap flow increased after the initial cut, not from pressure, but in response continuing until the tool was withdrawn. The plant did not die from the wound, it stabilized. This was the only rose known to survive removal from its place of origin. An object of unease, the specimen was stored, not displayed. Researchers avoided prolonged contact. One assistant requested reassignment, citing recurring dreams of suffocation and falling. Another claimed the room felt crowded despite being empty. These accounts were dismissed as suggestion. But the notes grow shorter over time. Entries become infrequent. Eventually, documentation stops altogether. The specimen was later recorded as lost during a containment failure. No further details were given. No other roses have since been successfully studied. Folklore versus biology. Modern botanists argue that the rose of the reaper could be a rare mutation, perhaps a plant reacting uniquely to mineral-rich soil, contaminated by blood, ash, or decomposition. Others point to fungal symbiosis or iron-absorbing species misidentified through fear. These explanations address the plant's appearance, but not its behavior. Why did it grow only in sites of unjust death? Why did it resist transplantation? Why did it bleed? Plants respond to environment, but they do not discriminate moral context. And yet, the rose appears to have done exactly that, appearing not where death occurred, but where it violated something deeper. A living accusation in many traditions, the dead require witnesses. Without acknowledgement, injustice lingers. The rose of the reaper fits this psychological need too precisely to dismiss. It marked places where courts failed, where records were altered, where truth was buried. The flower did not call for vengeance. It did not curse the living. It simply grew quietly where silence had been imposed, as if to say, this happened. Why it withered the inability to cultivate the rose elsewhere may not be accidental. Folklore insists the flower feeds on unresolved injustice. Remove it from that context, and it starves. The one surviving specimen challenges this idea, but perhaps it survived not because it could live anywhere, but because the injustice it marked had never been resolved. If so, the rose did not need the soil, it carried the memory with it. No new sightings in the modern era, no verified sightings of the rose of the reaper have been recorded. This absence invites uncomfortable interpretations. Has justice improved? Or has the world simply become better at hiding its wrongs? Mass graves are paved over, records are sealed. Death is bureaucratized, sanitized. Perhaps the rose no longer has room to grow. Or perhaps it still does and no one is looking closely enough. A flower that should not be touched, the rose of the reaper, was never meant to be understood, catalogued, or owned. It was not medicine, not poison, not ornament. It was evidence. A reminder that the earth keeps accounts even when humans do not. That some wrongs leave marks deeper than bones, and that attempts to study or remove those marks may fail not because they are supernatural, but because they were never meant to leave. If the rose bled, perhaps it did so, not because it was alive, but because something beneath it still was. And perhaps the reason it no longer appears is not that injustice has ended, but that the ground has grown tired of speaking.